Vodafone Group is a global company with mobile operations in 24 countries. They have partnered with mobile networks in 42 more, and they have fixed broadband operations in 19 markets. With over 700 million total customers around the world, Vodafone is responsible for protecting a significant amount of data. So what does security and compliance mean for them? We spoke with Vodafone to ask if they are more secure now that multiple countries have made the move to mature their privacy regulations. Vodafone Global Security Director Emma Smith has been at the forefront of these security and compliance efforts, and she shared why there is no privacy without security. So Emma, 34 years ago, Vodafone completed your first mobile call.
Yeah.
And now you're protecting the data for 700 million customers globally, right?
That's right.
A lot of regulations, a lot of different requirements in different regions and different countries. And of course, there's GDPR. So can you talk a little bit about how Vodafone managed GDPR?
Yeah, sure. And we feel huge responsibility for protecting that huge customer base that we've got.
Sure.
A real duty of care across the company. GDPR was created really in Europe to protect citizens' privacy rights, and it gives a framework also for enforcing those rules and regulations. What's been great about GDPR is it's allowed a refocus. So we've always been very focused on privacy and security, but this gave us the opportunity to refocus.
So Emma, we know that unfortunately there have been a lot of companies in the news that have been compliant, but they're not necessarily secure. So we know compliance doesn't mean security. Can you talk a little bit about how you balance compliance and security?
I think that's a great question. Really important that we don't think about compliance as a tick box exercise, and that we really do think about how we manage and mitigate risk. I also think that no matter what we all do, none of us will ever be completely immune. So there will be attacks that are successful sometimes in any company, any government, any organisation. So it's really important that we have risk management at the forefront of how we approach it. We've taken that approach in Vodafone where we've worked very closely with the privacy teams, the security being the big enabler for privacy. And we have a strap line that is there's no privacy without security. And we've done that really to bring the two teams together to make sure that all of our controls are very similar in the way we roll them out. And we can also demonstrate the regulatory compliance that we need to demonstrate.
Okay, excellent. And your peers out there globally, right? The CISOs globally, they're dealing with limited resources, a lot of data, a lot of regulations in different areas of the world. They don't want to make the front page because of a breach. What are the top 2 or 3 pieces of advice you would give them?
I think we all find it hugely challenging and feel that weight of responsibility to do the right thing. So for me, I'd say probably a couple of things. Having a risk framework to prioritise against so that we are prioritising our efforts in the right way on the highest risks and making sure we mitigate those. I also think really important that you have that dialogue at the top of the company with the executive committee and the board, particularly about risk appetite and what is the real risk appetite and tolerance for the company and how you then implement against that. And then I'd say lastly, making sure you've got the right security capability, whether that's all in-house, a blend of partners and third parties, but making sure you've got enough security capability to be able to deliver what you've committed.
From your experience becoming compliant, is there anything you would have done differently?
I think probably one thing we'd have done differently is thought about how we measure control effectiveness and how do we build more reliable ongoing monitoring and measuring so that we're not relying in point-in-time assurance. And so I think if we were going back 3 or 4 years, I'd be building more data-driven real-time assurance so that at any point in time I can get a sense of our compliance and health across the company.
What would be your top 5 checklist of things to do to become compliant?
So I think, first of all, setting the right standard. We align our policies around international standards, and that means you get 95% of the way there to most of the regulations. And then in each market, we work locally to understand where local laws might need us to uplift that bar. We then have a really clear strategy that we set with our board across the whole company, and that gives somewhere to aspire towards to keep us moving, keep us investing. Measuring where we are, so always knowing where we are at a point in time and how far away we are from that strategy and that risk appetite. And then having a prioritised programme of work, being really clear on what outcomes we want to achieve. We talk about epics, so what outcomes do we want to deliver through our programmes and being very clear on those outcomes. And then last but not least, making sure that we're looking at new technologies, new threats. It's really easy, I think, to have one eye always on the present because there's always so much going on, but always thinking about new technologies, new threats in the future.
Talk to me about how you're protecting customer information before GDPR and what you were doing differently after GDPR.
At GDPR, we work really closely with the privacy teams to do security and privacy impact assessments, and that would be the main change, I think. So across all of our big data stores, data repositories, places where we transit data, we did what we call a security and privacy impact assessment. And that looked at things like the volume of data, the type of data, how it's protected. And I think before, we didn't have that same structure where security and privacy were joined together in the assessments. And it worked really well for us to understand where's our high-risk data and how do we protect it best.
Yeah, and that takes me to my next question. As a telecommunications organization, you store a lot of confidential information. How do you assess and manage your risk, given all of the changing regulations?
I think, like most companies, I think minimizing the amount of data that you store it takes you a long way, because then you're protecting less and less data. So keeping only the minimum. And interestingly, telcos don't store the most sensitive customer data, which is typically the content of the communication, so phone calls, messaging. And we don't store that unless we're legally required to. And so that means actually the amount of data is significantly less in terms of what's stored. And then we have the same employee and customer data like everybody else. And doing those privacy impact assessments for us was really important for us to know where that data is and how do we protect it. We then, in each of the countries that we operate in, understand if there are any local laws that are specific to telcos, and that allows us to then uplift our policies and our baseline to meet those local requirements.
What is Vodafone's stance when it comes to your employee data privacy?
When we think about personal data, we think about both employees and customers that we work with and how we protect their data. I think the interesting part about employee data and employee privacy is making sure our security tools don't encroach on that privacy. So a lot of what we're doing now in security is looking for unusual behavior or unusual movements in data. And we've got to be really careful that doesn't encroach on monitoring employees or employees' privacy. So that's key. And to make sure we don't do that, we work really closely with the privacy teams, and we also work with our employee works councils so that they're fully aware of everything that we're doing and we're really transparent about the security monitoring.
Thank you so much, Emma. It's been a pleasure to be here. I've enjoyed walking across the campus. We had beautiful weather in London, which I know we don't always experience, and I really appreciate your candor in answering the questions.
No, thanks for coming on. It's been our pleasure to host you here. You're welcome anytime.